This is where the camera is, right? So, welcome everyone to this once again very special session in our One Book Many World series, in the Lunchtime Colloquium series. This is the very last of the One Book Many World sessions, and it is also the very last of the Lunchtime Colloquium sessions for this particular semester. Next week we have a closed Lunchtime Colloquium session, so many of you unfortunately will not be able to be there. And the week after that we don't have a Lunchtime Colloquium session because on that Friday we have a research forum, the semi-annual, is it a semi-annual when it happens twice a year? Semi-annual research forum will take place on the Friday, 7th of February in the Senaza, starting from 10 o'clock. All of you are cordially invited to come and join us there. So a very warm welcome. Without any further ado, we will jump into our two very special speakers today. But before that, a word from our sponsors.
So what we'd like you to do, or what we'd like to ask you to do, is, if possible, maybe rate, following the QR code, these sessions. The format has been new to us. We're not really sure. We have a feeling that they work well, but we would be happy to hear your feedback as well. And if you have time, it takes not more than 3 minutes, promised, to kind of like follow the QR code and give us feedback on each session. We do start today, so we do have two in-house speakers basically, although they're not staff of the RCC, but people who have are visiting scholars currently at the RCC. Our first speaker is Sabina Magagnoli. She's currently a visiting scholar and has been working in secondary schools for a long time, is currently a PhD student, working in sustainable development and climate change, and is interested mainly in how to develop environmental awareness in educational contexts using the environmental humanities and eco-critical concepts in the process of learning English as a second language. So we do have somebody here who actually goes outside of academia, talks to younger people, and tries to make them connect to their environment. She has lived in Bologna for a very long time, which is a very urban place, and she told me, I find kind of like respite from that and balance in nature, and that is also something that I want to inspire in my students. I got into eco-pedagogy because I want them to be more biophilic and kind of like help them find these connections for themselves. So, Sabina, do you want to come up?
So thank you, Anna, Hannah, Christoph, and the entire Carson Center, and all the scholars and staff who are giving me a lot of support and feedback for my research, and thank you all for being here. My research comes from the need to contribute in a time of emergency. In my field, which is the teaching of English as a foreign language in upper secondary schools, I feel the responsibility to find integrated ways to help students develop the English language together with the awareness of the interrelationship between humans, nature, and climate change. And when they develop this awareness, I believe it is fundamental to support them in communicating it. Since this One Book Many Worlds series is inspired by Gun Island, I will now briefly discuss how I would use this novel to foster interdisciplinary learning and critical thinking in an upper secondary school setting, reflecting also the interdisciplinary nature of my own doctoral research program at Pavia and University of Ferrara. So I'm going to refer briefly to Gun Island as a starting point, a potential generator of interconnections and ideas in the specific case of a possible upper secondary school interdisciplinary collaboration. Next, I'll share some key pedagogical ideas that have really shaped my thinking, and both in my current research and in my past teaching. And then I will show you some concrete examples of eco-pedagogical transdisciplinary activities for climate communication that I developed and implemented at school. My current research actually builds upon these hands-on experiences, exploring them more in depth. So a way to involve students in understanding and appreciating an island, and particularly its climate-related issues and their many implications, could be to work on the book together, involving also other teachers in this interdisciplinarily with a social environmental focus. The first language teacher, in this case in Germany, could be the German teacher, first language, could read the whole book in class with the students, with student-centered approaches, while teachers of other subjects could support students in analyzing and discussing specific passages coherent with their curricular subject and with the students' interests. For example, the many extreme climate events described in the book could be seen through different interrelated perspectives in the geography, history, natural science, or art lessons. You could even involve mathematics. I just learned about that, that there are these numerical models of the atmosphere, that I need to look into it with a mathematician. Regarding EFL, English as a foreign language, for its intrinsically communicative nature, it could be involved to give students an opportunity to elaborate transdisciplinarily and work on climate awareness and its implications. Now I will show you a concrete example of a climate communication project that I developed with my students. That was not based on Ghana Island, but in that case the students worked on non-fictional environmental humanities within the English as a foreign language context. But before discussing the example, I will synthesize the key ideas at the basis of my eco-pedagogical approach. Eco-pedagogy is an educational approach that emphasizes the interconnectedness of humans and the environment. The place where education happens is very important for many reasons. In concrete terms, it is very useful to explore the school and its territory, what it offers in terms of its spaces, the facilities, the area around it, the community that lives in it, and the surrounding spaces. They end up telling you how to put into practice your ecocentric idea with a sort of place agency. Then, this approach is inspired to Paulo Freire's education and critical thinking, but you will see practical examples of it later. Another important element that in the teacher is the awareness of the teacher's awareness and consideration of the unique epistemologies and ways of being of the students, including their cultural backgrounds, lived experiences, and different perceptions of their environment. These three interrelated elements are the starting points of the school project that I'm going to show you, developed at the Aldini Valeriani Technical and Vocational Institute. Going back to the importance of the place, it was exploring the school and meeting the people who look after it that I discovered that it has a visual radio station available for producing and broadcasting visual radio content. So I started experimenting with my students, and this was the result. We modeled our English lessons on radio episodes that focused on climate change and reported on local and global news, interpreted by the students with their perspectives and stories. Here in the pictures, you see students studying passages from non-fictional environmental humanities, helping each other to read online national and international news and discussing how to develop the future episode. Professor David Grasso, who is in charge of the radio station, gave us technical support. And during the process, I supported students linguistically and taught them basic concepts from ecolinguistics or strategies from context and language awareness to be able to compare ideas and opinions critically. Here are two pictures from the episode that was broadcast on the 8th of May 2023, when the Emilia-Romagna region, around Bologna, around our school, was flooded. And the students reported eco-critically what was happening and told their stories. In the flood episode, students also gave salience to the lived experience of animals. In a little town near Bologna, Crevalcore, there is a nest where every year a couple of storks come to lay their eggs. A live cam monitors them, and you can see them online. And the students followed the development of the situation and witnessed the storks losing their chicks because of the heavy rain. So they decided to tell their story in the episode. And this is a decentering process, telling about the flood also from the perspective of the storks. It is important to enable students to tell the stories of those who do not have a voice. And this brings me to another very important aspect of eco-pedagogy: students who do not have a voice. And with this I conclude. For students who are struggling with the language for many reasons that there isn't time to discuss here, it is important to develop appropriate strategies that also take into account the complexity behind the reasons for these difficulties. I experimented with multimodal forms of climate communication through, for example, nest making or the creation of butterfly shelters in the city park near the school, or art. Students were able to learn English while they were involved in these creative processes, and they communicated their stories in a multimedia way. For example, this is a dramatization of the indigenous creation myth of Sky Woman, falling from the sky. According to this myth, the animals that were here before us welcomed the first human being and helped her survive. I hope that with these few and local examples, I've made my point clear. Climate change education is not only about knowing a story, it's about being a story and telling it. A story of hope, resilience, and care. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabina. I think perhaps I'll speak for many of us by saying that I wish you'd be my English teacher. It sounds so cool. Our next speaker also has experience teaching language, and so perhaps this is a point we'll hear about later when they talk to each other. But Julia Ludewig is an associate professor of German at the World Languages and Cultures Department at Allegheny College. She researches actually also about different voices in climate, so her research touches on comics and graphic novels, but also language pedagogy, as well as the environmental humanities. And she, like Sabina, is also currently a visiting scholar at the RCC. But interestingly, last time she was in Munich, before visiting here, she undertook a little climate journey on her own and went by foot to Venice. So it took 3 weeks and walked to Venice. So please join me in welcoming wanderer and language philosopher Julia Ludewig.
Thank you so very much. And that was 20 years ago, so you do the math, right? Right after high school graduation, this is what my best high school friend and I, we did 3 weeks of hiking across the Alps, and Munich only got 2 days, but I'm rediscovering Munich with 20 years distance. So thank you very much for inviting us, and thank you, Sabina, for preparing this with me. This has been a blast. Before heading into my comments, I would like to say a tad bit about my background in addition to what Anna has presented here. So I am by training a cultural scholar who is most interested, I would say, at the basic level in narratives, in the question how stories shape societies, how stories shape how individuals and communities think. My most recent degree is in comparative literature, but again, I'm not really a very typical comparatist. I am mostly working with graphic novels or comics, right? They're really the same. One is just a fancy marketing term. So I am really interested, it seems like Sabina, in multimodal communication, but in the end, and I will come back to that at the end of my little statement here, it doesn't really matter which medium you're working in, right? Whatever medium you know well and whatever medium works for the people who you want to engage, that is the medium we should choose. Now, recently I've become more and more interested in how any of these media can be used at the service of climate change communication and community building. Now, I have taught community engaged classes. It seems like Sabina and I have done some of the same things. The students have built gardens, for instance, or have worked in environmental NGOs. What I haven't done yet, and that is something that it's becoming increasingly clear to me, is to involve people outside of academia, to really involve the community that we are already in, but is not our students. And I want to lift up one scholar whom I met recently at a conference. Her name is Hanna Musiol. She is up at the University of Tromsø in Norway, because she has done what I think I would like to aspire to, namely create sincere and intimate connections with her local community. She involves refugees, she involves citizens that have been living in Tromsø for a long time, and the students. And she really inspired me with her idea, one of the ideas I'm going to bring back at the end when I talk about concrete workshop ideas. So, one more thing. About 2018, I started to be part of a grassroots group in my small Pennsylvania rural community that started to draft and then shepherd through City Council a climate action plan. And ever since, I thought that we've done a great job in drafting all of these technical benchmarks, and we totally failed to actually use the community and engage the community we had there in what I would call a collective storytelling or visioning process. And ever since, I thought this is what I would really eventually like to do. So if anyone has experience with such an effort, please do talk to me, I'm curious. So without further ado, my thoughts about reactions to Gosh's books are really rather tangential. They won't be as concrete as Sabina's. I would say that they are practical and speculative. So they are practical in two ways. So when I read the book, and when I read any kind of scholarship that is broadly within the realm of eco-criticism, I'm getting more and more interested in the pragmatic and empirical scholarship that begins to form. So we often read either between the lines or very explicitly that the texts or the media we engage can develop our imagination, right? Our environmental imagination, or build empathy, multi-species empathy, change something in our cognition. And that is wonderful if that happens. The problem is the evidence for that is rather slim. And there's actually quite conflicting evidence when we look at the first broader empirical studies. It's definitely more complex than you read a text such as Gosh's and are compelled to eco-political action. And that is something that I felt very much when I read the book. So it actually can backfire very much how people read and react to these books. So that is one interesting and I would say pragmatic avenue that I'm getting interested in, namely what actually happens individually and collectively when we read any one book. I'm also curious in practical terms in the sense that I believe rather than sparking any particular environmental, let's say, disposition, any book, and Gosh's as well as any other book, could really be a catalyst for community building. And that could be a community that is a community of readers, including, let's say, secondary high school students, or a community that you build and find in whatever place. Now, I would also think that my comments are highly speculative because, number one, I haven't done anything of what I'm going to present in just a moment. So I haven't tried any of these interventions. I would love to. They're also speculative in the sense that I think speculative literature is having a moment. So either in the form of the gloom and doom variety or in the more hopeful utopian avenue, I really think that There is an urge right now to respond to the urgencies and the problems that we find ourselves in with some kind of speculative look into the future. And why stop at just consuming these texts? Why not start and empowering all of us to start producing and contributing to these speculative imaginations? Now, I'm sure you're asking yourself, like, when is she going to finally give us some examples? So here they are. I am very much inspired by this slide here in Sabina's talk. This one here, right? Which to me is really a visualization of place-based pedagogy. And that, I believe, goes or is applicable to any kind of community you're working with. So let's say, in a perfect world, I get to talk to 30 people from my communities, my small rural town in Pennsylvania. Hopefully this is a diverse group of citizens. Maybe we read a book such as Gosh's, and we discuss that. It's the usual book club vibe. What happens after that? I think what is the really important additional step is to ask the students, such as, or much like Sabina has already pointed to, or the participants rather, to react with their own stories, right? So here are just 3 prompts that come out of my reactions to Gosh, but you could really imagine 1,000 different prompts. So for instance, you have these 30 participants. You could ask them, what local lore exists that haunts us in this particular place and why? And I'm thinking of the snake goddess plotline, right? So what is something that is locally important and goes back through oral tradition that is becoming again important through the lens of ecological changes? Or secondly, how do any of these participants experience changes in the ecosystems? In Gosh's book, it's the Sundarbans. Any other liminal or non-liminal ecosystem can be the subject of this. I'm thinking of the coastlines, the eroding coastlines up in the northern part of Germany, or it could be the drought-ridden English garden here, right? And really anything is fair game for such a prompt. And lastly, how do global streams of goods, people, signs show up in our lives? Whether that be the foods and goods we consume, or the people we encounter or don't encounter. Really, right? The absences are just as telling as the presences. Like, which people, which goods, which narratives do we no longer see that we have seen in the past, and why? And then importantly, here's the creative part. What would we like this situation to be in X amount of years, right? This is a typical exercise in many climate action plans that participants come together and they imagine how their particular city will look in 2050 or 2060 or what have you, right? So I believe that this visioning process is a very, very important and empowering one. Now, I'm coming back to Hannah's workshop idea because she works, as I said, with very, very different people. Refugees with language barriers. She works with her students. She works with city inhabitants. How does she ensure that, number one, everyone gets to participate in one story creation process, and that no one dominates, or few voices dominate the conversation and the storytelling process? She does that with what she calls a wave model. It's quite extreme. She has each participant only add 3 words, and then you pass your sheet or whatever it is on. If you really want to tell a story of your neighborhood 50 years from now, that's probably too small of an approach, but any kind of chunking would work, right? The main goal being everyone has to participate and no one gets to dominate the conversation or the visioning process. Now, I want to close by saying again that I look at comics, other people look at monomodal traditional literary text, other people do visual media, do radio, do podcasting. It really doesn't matter, right? I believe that there's an awareness that storytelling goes or transcends medial forms. Of course, every medium brings its own affordances and its own ways of expressing certain things, but in the end, it really doesn't matter which form you choose. It needs to be a form that appeals to your participants, that they feel invited and empowered to use, and that is the medium that you would choose. And with that, I close and thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, please. We were told that you have questions for each other, so we would just like to encourage you to start with those.
Thank you so much. So yeah, we thought that one very typical question that often comes up in any kind of applied context is, tell me, what are your experiences in terms of what went well? Where were your challenges in your experiences and your pedagogical interventions? And share some of the concrete insights you garnered from that.
Well, being an optimist, I think that most things went well, but because I wanted to see it this way. But actually, it wasn't always like this. Seeing students that develop and learn to be a community that cares for the environment is something that really enriches teachers as well. So this is going well for me. Mm-hmm. Then there are elements that might be considered negative, which are related to the sense of community that you were mentioning before. That is, that sometimes it's very difficult to involve the rest of the community. So there are some very special people who care and who put a lot of effort in participating and doing it. But I must say that the majority doesn't seem to be interested. Because there is this sort of business as usual way of approaching what you do in life, which sometimes distracts you from focusing on caring for nature or for the environment. So yeah, one difficulty was maybe to involve everybody. One of my aims was also to manage to involve the families, but often it is difficult to get in touch with them, even some of them. So it's important to find this connection, families and the teachers. Well, for the teacher, I have good news because we are, on a national level, we are organizing a group that is called Rete Educazione Ecologica, which is ecological education network, and we are organizing seminars to talk about what we do in class and to compare it. It's at all levels, from the elementary schools to the upper secondary schools, and we meet online every 15 days, and there are seminars coming up in Reggio Emilia and Rome and Naples in the future months. So I think that there is something that's developing, but I don't think it is enough. It's not enough for what we're facing at the moment. So I think, yeah, the good side is someone is doing something and it's important, but the bad thing is that many people don't care. So that we should find ways to involve more people and make them care. And what you said about this scholar who studies the communities is very interesting. So I think it's important that maybe you can develop that more in detail, also in your theoretical approach. Well, how have you worked on that? Have you?
I haven't.
Yeah,
that's a short answer. But I did reach out to this particular scholar. Again, her name is Hanna Musial, up in Tromsø, Norway. And I talked to her, and she said it is really, really tough work to foster those connections, to not tread on anyone's toes, because her institution, for instance, is one that is very technically oriented, and it seems that there is threading the needle between a pretty open political stance and not stepping outside a university line for her was really a challenge. And I think that would apply to my particular situation as well. We are a rural, depressed Rust Belt town, and the fact that we were able to have a climate action plan approved says nothing about the general population's readiness to really dive into quite drastic visions of how lives would change. And so that is probably a reason for why I've stopped short of really going door to door and inviting people to have such a process. So yeah, it's something that I imagine is for political reasons, and then of course for logistical reasons, not easy to do. I mean, how do you get working class people together in a room, right? At what time? Who is going to come? How are you inviting more than just the usual suspects, the people who are always the most vocal or most plugged in? How are we going to get into a sincere conversation people with very, very different political viewpoints? So all of these, I think, will be real challenges, but nevertheless, it's very important to try.
Yeah, and also there must be also some positive things that you found as you asked me. Mm-hmm. I'm asking you, what positive aspects would you like to tell us about your future positive outcomes of what you expect?
Well, I can tell from the community engaged classes that I taught, those really did something, I would say, to the students more than to the community members. The students very often felt they mattered because we are such a small college town. It was often the first time for the students to actually venture outside and talk to people who've been living there for a longer time. So students often, I think, felt a real sense of new connection to the place where they would be spending 4 years of their formative years. For the community members, it's tricky because on the one hand, they really appreciated the help. Let's say the students really helped build a small community garden that wouldn't have existed without the students' help. On the other hand, of course, it's a one semester stint, you're gone, and the residents there are then left with whatever the students accomplished. So I think a promise would be to really co-design a class with the community members rather than to have your syllabus ready and then look for, cherry pick the partners you want. So I think that would be a real step forward to ask, what is it that the community needs? And then develop the pedagogy from the bottom up. But that, I think, I haven't managed yet.
Yeah.
But I feel has a lot of potential.
It has, also because maybe involving the psychologists who work in the community. There are many, for example, at school, there are many psychologists who support students also, both what happens at school and the students in specific needs. So maybe also involving them, because they know the territory better than us teachers, could be a way, a resource to exploit. And I've been trying to do that, but it's not easy. It's not easy, but they could be involved, and they usually are very collaborative. So
I want to mention one concrete success story that doesn't have anything to do with my teaching, but actually one of the current council members is a former student, right? So having students stick around after graduation is a real challenge for us. They are usually like out the door as soon as they can. The few who stay really make a difference. And the fact that we could adopt, I'm saying we, like the city adopted a climate action plan has a lot to do with this former student's involvement in the city council. So I feel like if there are specific individuals who can stay on and who can really be plugged in the community, that makes a big difference.
Yeah, sometimes it only takes one person to motivate all the others. It's so easy. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't want to, hijack the entire time, so maybe there are questions you brought and then questions from the audience.
Well, I would, I would indeed have a question. You already hinted to that. It's kind of like the motivation to participate and to kind of like get people on board, and not only always the people who have an interest already. And I was wondering, maybe especially in Sabina's case, did you also encounter students who would say, well, you know, I'm here for learning English and not talking about the climate? And like, how do you get these kind of students involved as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, there isn't one type of student who doesn't want to be involved. Each student has his or her own characteristics. So it's very important to understand them, to know them, because often through their hobbies, their particular ways of seeing things, you might get through, you know, get to their attention, and it often happens also thanks to the help of the students who care, and we create a sort of collaboration with them, and it's very nice to see these dynamics within the class, where of course there is a group that wants to work on it, and they're very determined, and there are some instead who on the contrary not only are not interested, but sometimes they disrupt the whole process of doing things. So this thing is very interesting in education, and there is a lot of work behind it, but I think it should be explored more, particularly in eco-pedagogy, where there is also this element of nature and care for nature involved. So community, care for nature, and the students who do not want to participate. But yeah, I think there are many also educational techniques, like for example peer learning or cooperative learning, organizing groups, small groups, or giving responsibilities. Also giving responsibility to a student who usually doesn't want to take one because he's used to not having responsibility. For example, at home, the family doesn't give him any responsibilities because there is already this prejudice that he's not good for, he's good for nothing, right? There could be any family prejudice. So sometimes students, when they are seen with different eyes from the class community, transform themselves and they decide they want to take a responsibility. So it's important also to work on this, on the perception, the self-perception of students, what they believe in, is discussing what they believe in, what they think is important for them.
Okay. I'm so excited that this is our very last conversation in the series, and that the subject is so central in pedagogy, because pedagogy is very near and dear to Hannah and I's hearts. We, as many of you know, we were very involved in creating the master's program. We thought a lot about pedagogy, and one thing that I think, at least I found, and maybe you found as well, is that when you're working with students, the younger generation, something that you come up with again and again is not just climate, wanting to be engaged with climate and the passion, but also this grief and sense of difficulty and sense of kind of, it's a difficult subject. So how do each of you approach this with your students at the secondary or postgraduate or the graduate level? How do you work with grief and with struggling in terms of climate?
I can start. So I should say the following. When I work with students, these are self-selected, so that's a difference, right? So these are students who come from the environmental science department, so they are steeped in both the expectations and the, let's say, the optimism and also the grief. And very often that means they're very worn out, emotionally and cognitively worn out. And I don't have a silver bullet. What I do is I admit that I am in the exact same spot. I admit that I sometimes feel very despondent, and that my way of not feeling as despondent is to do the work that I'm doing. And then very often you will hear from the students that it is really for them to be in environmental science, or in it, they always have to have a major and a minor in my college, whatever the other subject they chose, they often have a deeply felt ideological loyalty to that choice, to that subject, and it often turns out that it's really an antidote for them to solastalgia and to eco-grief. To make it very transparent, to humanize ourselves. I have been hoping and thinking about reaching out to a colleague in psychology to really maybe see whether we can co-teach something on climate narratives, climate grief, climate emotions. We haven't been able to do that, but that would be a really concrete and enticing project for me to see what the pros say about that.
Well, grief is part of life, and this is something that students, when they encounter it, it's important that they process it, and they process it together, and we look at it without avoiding it. It's important to listen to their reaction to grief. Also like a cathartic process. Whenever grief appears in real life, not in a story, maybe they have tools, emotional tools to face that real grief. Also because somehow they have already encountered this in an educational protected environment. So also grief is important. If you are cautious about it and about how you develop it with students, and you are open to listening to the way they see grief, the way they live grief, and it is also a good occasion to listen to their feedback about a story that that comes from a fictional character or a fictional situation. For example, the grief of the female protagonist in Gun Island. Well, that's something that could be read as a development of grief, as something that can be worked on with the students. Yeah.